Thank you, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. It has been 10 years since the Supreme Court's disastrous decision in Citizens United, and I am here today to call for a constitutional amendment to overturn it. In the 5-4 majority opinion, Justice Anthony Kennedy dismissed concerns about corruption caused by limitless spending. He wrote, quote, "The appearance of influence or access will not cause the electorate to lose faith in our democracy." But it has. The decision knocked down long-standing bipartisan campaign finance laws. Now, there are three primary problems that have crystallized in the Citizens United decade. First, extreme election spending destroys any hope of political equality in America. Second, current disclosure and anti-coordination rules have not prevented corruption or stopped foreign interference. And third, very few, very wealthy individuals have extraordinary influence. Government institutions too often focus on their pet projects rather than on the public will. Citizens United unleashed a torrent of billions of dollars into our elections. In the 20 years before the Citizens United decision, $750 million of outside spending. In the 10 years since, over $4.5 billion. Dark money groups are not required to disclose their donors. Their spending jumped from $129 million in the 10 years before the decision to $1 billion since. The 10 families who spent the most in our elections in the Citizens United decade spent a total of $1.2 billion. Now, to put that in perspective, it would take 6 million Americans spending $200 each to match the spending of these 10 families. This flood of spending has distorted the agenda in Congress, and we now know that it is sapping America's faith in our democracy and our government. 84% of Americans think that special interests come first here. Last year, the House passed the For the People Act and the Voting Rights Advancement Act, and these bills would require disclosure and end gerrymandering and make it easier to vote and protect voting rights. But statutory changes alone can't fix the problems created by Citizens United. The Democracy for All amendment would allow reasonable limits on campaign spending. Americans want to get big money out of our elections. The amendment rejects the Supreme Court's claim that only quid pro quo bribes can corrupt politicians. Our amendment would level the playing field. It would promote political equality, and it would protect the integrity of our government institutions and elections. I want to thank the millions of advocates and hundreds of organizations who built the movement to get money out of politics. 20 states and over 800 local governments are calling for a constitutional amendment, and we wouldn't be here today without them. I want to thank Vice Chair Raskin, Representative McGovern, Representative Katko, Senators Udall and Shaheen for joining me in introducing this bipartisan amendment. And I want to thank the 210 co-sponsors, including Congresswoman Jayapal and many members of this subcommittee for their support. And to be clear, this issue is not partisan among the American people. In 2018, the University of Maryland reported that 75% of Americans, 3/4 of all Americans, support a constitutional amendment to allow for limits on election spending. That includes 85% of Democrats, 70% of independents, and 2/3 of Republicans. We must overturn Citizens United to fulfill the ideals we affirmed at our nation's founding. The Democracy for All amendment is necessary because your status in our democracy should not depend upon your status in our economy. Whether you work 3 jobs and barely get by, or you own 3 homes and you barely work, the eyes of our law, the eyes of our government, our elections, must see all Americans as equal. This amendment will get money out of our elections, and most importantly, it will put voters back in charge. With that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time, and I yield back.